Good afternoon. My name is Sierra Chasson. I will be discussing chemical, physical, and biological hazards for the loss control class. First, we're going to discuss H2S. It is hydrogen sulfide, which is a colorless gas at normal temperature and pressure with an odor like that of rotten eggs. I chose to discuss H2S to educate others on the severity of the natural gas and inform them of the effects if inhaled or came in contact with. All of my information was gathered from using the CDC website given to us in our syllabus. Hydrogen sulfide is a primary contributor to corrosion in refinery processing units and piping. However, presence of this gas may deaden the sense of smell, so odor alone cannot be used for detection. It is also important to have an H2S monitor handy. In cases of extreme low temperature and or high pressure, H2S can be liquefied. It is also known as a sour gas, which is a natural gas that contains corrosive and sulfur-bearing compounds, such as hydrogen sulfide. The permissible exposure limit for H2S, according to OSHA standards, are 20 parts per million at ceiling level and 50 parts per million maximum for 10 minutes with no other exposure. An H2S monitor and respirator should always be used with known and unknown levels of H2S. The recommended exposure limit for H2S is 10 parts per million over a 10-minute period, and 50 parts per million should be evacuated in the area. Your threshold limit value for H2S is 1 parts per million averaged over a 10-minute period, and for short-term exposure it is 5 parts per million. The following engineering controls, work practices, and personal protective equipment should be used when dealing with H2S. You always want to make sure your workspace is well ventilated. When entering a confined space, you should always have a permit. Also, when entering a confined space, you want to know your ways out, your quickest way out. Proper respirators need to be worn to reduce potential exposure. And if you are ever exposed to H2S, call 911 immediately or the posted emergency numbers located at the job site. You can also see on this slide the parts per million concentration along with the symptoms and effects. As you can see, when you get to the 500 to 700 parts per million, you'll start to be delayed, and it'll cause serious damage to your eyes, death within 30 to 60 minutes. Exposure of 1,000 to 2,000 parts per minute is nearly instant death. So you always want to make sure you have some kind of H2S equipment, whether it's the respirators or your monitors, to help prevent you from getting to extreme measures. Next, we're going to talk about hexavalent chromium. I chose to discuss this because it is used in many everyday products. It can be a metal or wood finish, wood preservatives. It's used in wood preservatives and fungicides. All compounds are toxic as well as carcinogenic. They can cause lung cancer, asthma, or damage to your nasal epithelia. Hexavalent chromium is a toxic form of the element chromium. It is rarely found in nature and is generally man-made. It is also present in fumes generated during welding. We're going to do a medical surveillance on hexavalent chromium. The purpose of a medical surveillance is to determine if an individual can be exposed to hexachlorophyllum at his or her workplace without experiencing adverse health effects. So within 30 days after initial assignment to a job involving hexavalent chromium, the worker should receive an examination that meets the requirements of the standard within the last 12 months. You should be given an examination annually. Within 30 days of seeing your doctor, they should have a written medical opinion recommending any additional examination. You should be seen when a worker shows signs or symptoms of the adverse health effects associated with hexavalent chromium. You should see a doctor within 30 days after exposure during an emergency which results in an uncontrolled release. And at the termination of an employment that may have been subjected to hexavalent chromium, you should do a final examination provided for the last 6 months prior to the date of termination, just to be clear that when leaving the firm or company, this employee was safe and had no illnesses from being exposed to hexavalent chromium. Next, we're going to discuss carbon dioxide. This topic was given to us from our instructor. We gathered this information from our textbook, and we're going to discuss the indoor air quality for carbon dioxide. We want levels in urban settings to be around 350 parts per million. When levels rise above 1,000 parts per million, your HVAC system needs to be looked at. The reason for your HVAC system is to supply your office or your area with fresh air. So when you see your levels of carbon dioxide start to rise, then obviously something's wrong with your HVAC system. At 15,000 parts per million, some loss of mental acuity has been noticed, and some health effects from carbon dioxide exposure leads to drowsiness, difficulty concentrating, and increased respiratory rate. That is all I have for you. Thank you for listening and getting to know more about H2S, hexavalent chromium, and carbon dioxide. Hopefully this can help you out and you learned something.